All right, guys, I'm going to get right into it. My talk. This is part retrospective. It's also mostly for context because I know a lot of you probably haven't been to a DevOps Days before. You're probably new to DevOps, and maybe you've got questions. Maybe it's all really weird to you. So this is for you guys. And I want to leave you with a little bit of advice to go back to your organization with and hopefully do some good and make things a little bit easier for you. The alternate title is some of you work in startups and you have no idea what the hell is going on here. Because as we know, startups are a different beast. They respond to the same problems and deal with the same situations, but at much, much smaller scale. And you might not realize that you have giant empathy problems in a startup because you all sit around the same table and eat lunch together. So, but bear with me. Even if you're part of a startup, there's some valuable stuff in here, and there's lots of context. So maybe you're here to find out, what all the fuss is about. Betsy mentioned the hype cycle. We're definitely in there. We're well in there at this point. Maybe you want to hear success and failure stories, learn from other people's experience, hear about toys and techniques and different ways of approaching transformation or projects or something you're working on. And maybe you're just here to escape work, right? But the joke's probably on you because you're probably on call right now. So enjoy that. And if you run out of the room, we all know what that's about, so don't feel bad. But really, I think the real reason why we're here is to learn and share from each other, and I think that's really valuable, and something like Open Spaces is priceless for that, so definitely take advantage. Propose your own topics and get involved that way. You'll find that when you leave and you go back, it's the Open Spaces that really stuck with you and gave you the actionable items and the things that you're going to do right away. So those of us who come to these things over and over again, and there's a couple old faces here, we're happy to have you. We're really glad that you're here, and we're really glad to see this happening in Detroit. So welcome, and thanks for coming out. So a little bit about me starting out. I've got about 18 years in IT, from fixing computers at the very, very beginning. And I worked for big companies and startups and back and forth. Right now, I work for a tiny startup, and I love throwing frisbees. That's a little non-work thing that I spend a lot of time on. So when we talk about DevOps, there's a lot of nebulous information there, and people try to decide if it's a trend or if it's something that's been a long time coming. And I would argue that really it's a bit of both, right? It's partially a name that we've assigned to a trend, but really it's been coming forever, right? And my talk is about where it's come from and the things that went into making it what it is and having it be this giant force in our industry right now. So really this is kind of chronological, but I'm not going to assign dates to anything. There's not going to be any real super technical history parts. I'm not going to put numbers on anything, but it's all in order, and it brings us through sort of the path of DevOps. So I started in tech support. I was answering calls at IBM, fixing Active Directory problems, probably like a couple of you. Then I went through build and release engineering, then IT management, then back into build and release engineering, then into systems engineering, and then consulting, and now I'm a CTO, sort of doing all kinds of crap. Basically all of that stuff in one role in a tiny company. I've always been a generalist, so for me DevOps means a lot because it's sort of this culmination that validates my entire career, right? It's like all this ops stuff that I used to do and all this dev stuff I used to do, and it was all kind of mashed together. And now we have this area that's kind of dedicated to it, and I like it a lot. But it's still really confusing because it means different things to different people. That's what it means to me. It means something different to you. That's totally fine. But I think build and release engineering is kind of this unique place where it's sort of blossomed because of its position between dev and ops, and always having to be, kind of the human wall between dev and ops the whole ways. So I've got a view into this my whole career, pretty much, and I think it's been valuable. So my argument is that DevOps is not a revolution. It didn't come from nowhere, right? And it's come from this sort of this battle against technical debt that we've faced throughout the history of building software. And there are just a stupid comment about this slide. There are tons of images about kids and computers online, but this is my favorite. It's definitely the absolute worst one that I could find. So you're welcome. And when I talk about technical debt, a term I like to think about, which nobody talks about and I can't really talk about, but I wanted to throw it in here because I love it. Zugswang is it's like a chess term, right, where you're sort of forced into making a move that's going to hurt you. But you have to make a move, you have to do something, but it's going to be painful, and it could actually cause you to lose the game. But because of the structure of chess and the obligation to make a move every turn, sometimes you're put into these crappy situations where you have to make a decision that's ultimately going to be bad, and you try and choose the least bad. And I think that speaks to me about technical debt a great deal, because people don't choose to do stupid things. They do choose to do the thing that they think is the best choice, whether or not it's painful or whether or not it's going to hurt them in the long run. They have to choose given the information they have at the time, and often it's forced, and there's an obligation there, right? We have to move fast. We're in businesses. We can't just take that for granted, especially nowadays, and more in the future, right? Everything moves faster. It doesn't move slower. So with this frame in mind, what I want to say is that technical debt is kind of the overarching theme of my talk that frames the situation for the arisal of DevOps. And when we think of the early days, a lot of us like talking about manufacturing when we talk about things like continuous delivery and delivery pipelines and shipping code and delivering value and all this stuff. It's all very sequential and runs through pipelines and channels, right? And that was all about consistency at scale. So the original assembly line was about scaling up our consistency and being able to do things faster because we could automate things, right, to a certain degree. And technical debt relates to that pretty closely because you've got waste, you've got poor processes. You could be building the wrong thing, and all of this happened way back in the day with manufacturing as well, and still happens with manufacturing. But with software, what you get is you sort of get your consistency for free, and you get your scale for free to a large extent, right? You can build one thing and replicate it indefinitely and pretty much guarantee that it's exactly the same when you replicate it. And from there, we started doing these software projects and started building things sequentially, right? Based on this manufacturing theory of, you sort of build a pipeline to build things, and then you put in inputs and you get out outputs. And this is very business driven, right? It's very like high level theory focused. And it turns out it's a giant misunderstanding, right? Like waterfall was never supposed to be the way it is. But there's a lot of parallels to DevOps in that way, right? Like DevOps is sort of understood by different people in different ways. There's a lot of methodologies and schools of thought. And even with waterfall, there's different tools, right? Everyone has different tools and techniques, and there was all kinds of stuff, people selling you things for waterfall, right? Based on this assumption that it was popular at a time and everybody was doing it, right? So it's kind of this ancient parallel to DevOps. And we all miss waterfall eventually when we move on and from these organizations that are super siloed and running really old school software delivery techniques. And we get better jobs at more agile organizations, and everybody here is hiring, so it's not really a problem. So if you're stuck in a waterfall organization, I would advise moving to another company. Don't try and fix that problem. It's probably not solvable by you, but if you want to tackle it, you're a champion, and maybe we'll read about you someday. But really, waterfall was super tenacious, right? It's still around. It's still around in a lot of places because it makes sense to people if they don't think beyond, a certain school of thought. If they don't think beyond a simple cause and effect or a simple pipeline, that's what makes sense to people. And it's taken us a long time to get by. It's like the cockroach of big companies. It's very, very difficult to kill. So also a little later on from waterfall, we had things like the knock was very prevalent, right? This picture is here because the title was Managed Services, Serious Fun. And it was like not sarcastic at all. Like it was just completely, I don't know. I just had to put it in because of the caption that came up in Google Images. It was awesome. Who here ever worked in a knock? Anybody? Wow, awesome. Okay, cool. Maybe not awesome, but awesome that you're still around. I mean that you survived, not that you're old. Knocks are still around too. So during this time, we see lots of mention to like Moore's law, and computing is accelerating at this crazy pace, and things are getting much quicker, right? So as we get bigger and more complicated systems, virtualization becomes a big thing because suddenly you've got this big machine, and instead of having everything that you want to pile onto it stomp each other to death, you want to sort of compartmentalize it and separate it and make sure that there's some safety there. And so you get distributed systems where you want to sort of diversify these virtual machines so that if one of your machines dies, everything doesn't go south. And suddenly it becomes possible to run like a server on your desktop or a server somewhere where it wouldn't conventionally exist. It'll take a little while for this to happen on the desktop, and we'll get there. And following this, we had things like version control and make, and you've got early versions of automation, or at least repeatable scripting that has some kind of flexibility and variance. And it was pretty fun to work with. But this is very, very early. This is like RCS, right? This is not Git that we're used to. This is very early days of version control. Mostly to save people from just renaming files, which we know still happens today. So lots of tenacious old practices going on. And we have the very beginnings of sort of tech entrepreneurship and online code, because it's now sort of possible to build your own things without a giant organization behind you. And giant organizations are not idle at this time, like idle and idle. So ITIL sort of arises as this thing where big companies are seeing like, oh, tech is making everything super complicated for us, and we don't know how to manage it, and we want to lock things down, so let's implement some kind of a framework to make this all standardized and simplify our lives so we can go on vacation and trust that everything's going to be great. And so there's like 30 volumes to ITIL, right? The original ITIL was like enormous, and I don't know if anyone's ever read the whole thing. Like, I don't know how it works, but it's very, very command and control IT oriented, right? It's very much like I will come down from the mountaintop with my 30 volumes, and somebody will read them and implement them and make sure that everything stays consistent. And it's a very realistic expectation. So ITIL, in itself is not necessarily bad, right? But it's probably overkill, and it probably doesn't apply very well to what all of us are doing, or really anybody at all. So naturally, Agile sort of appears, right, to pull us out of this mess that we've created in terms of like mass standardization and efforts to lock everything down. And so now we're seeing sort of like the rebellious teenage years of software development arise, right, where it's like, screw your corporate ways of doing everything standardized, like we're gonna just wing it and figure it out, man, because that's more natural, right? So things are starting to get good, but we're way, way off still. And we find ourselves back at manufacturing too, because lean sort of arises as this way of doing things in an agile manner, but with an absolutely minimal cycle, right? Like just run it as tiny as possible and minimize waste. And you have things like extreme programming, and big business at this time is sort of starting to outsource things, right? So they're like, this is happening in parallel. They're like, we have all this standardization and stuff that we don't have to deal with as long as we tell some company that we hire that they have to be like ITIL certified and compliant, and that way we can have our standardization but not actually have to deal with it ourselves. And this is going to work out great. So we're just going to be like running a business and then getting some other company to implement everything like according to our, you know, our master plan that we've bought from some consultant. And you know, in most tech entrepreneurship at this time, where you're building software, you're sort of shipping CDs, right? So back at this time, and for a long time, we're still shipping CDs or disks, floppy disks, 5 1/4, 3 1/2. And that brings us to sort of the rise of open source, right? Where we start reusing code and sharing it with people, because we realize that our code doesn't necessarily entirely drive the value of our organization at all levels, right? There's some stuff that's like super core and we do it better than everyone else and we want to do that stuff, but everything else we'll borrow from someone else and we'll share it with other people because it saves time, and make sure that we can hire people that understand a little bit more than just our specific company. And Jenkins begins sort of automating things to a certain degree. And it grows this culture, open source grows this culture of sort of pitching in to make great ideas actually great things by being really, really crappy and then just gradually improving, right? And so Linus comes along and gives us Git, and we're all like beginning this phase of like radical collaboration, right? Where everybody is working on the same things at the same time. And it's wonderful and very, very complicated, and there's a lot of problems involved, but overall we're starting to build things together, right? Even as separate members of different companies coming together to work on the same thing, and it's kind of amazing. So we have global collaboration on software products, and there's patches flying around via news groups and all kinds of alternate ways before we had GitHub and all these wonderful things. And now we've hit Moore's law to the point where like the desktop is very powerful, right? And virtualization is fairly mature. We see things like Mitchell coming out with Vagrant, and suddenly you can virtualize an entire environment on your desktop or your laptop as a developer, which is amazing because now you can sort of see your production system locally and work on things and not have to worry about, well, I hope this works, or, you know, it worked for me. And, you know, that sort of happened with the best of intentions back in the day, but the effect was, oh yeah, you're throwing things over the wall and everything's gonna break, and you don't care, and you have no empathy for us. And but we didn't know that at the time. We just thought everybody was dicks, and it was just like bad all over the place. So we have configuration management and infrastructure as code sort of arising as part of this. And it's driven by open source because we've got common libraries that we can all draw from, right? And continuous delivery begins to be a thing because Jez comes out with this book, and everyone's talking about sort of shipping software now, and shipping becomes the focus of everybody's engineering efforts. And with things like Git, you can just sort of check something out from a centralized repo, and that can be your deployment technique, right? But before that, you know, maybe you had some kind of a code review process, and that simplifies a lot of things, right? You no longer have to ship giant artifacts. You can be a little bit more flexible. And Jenkins is now at a point where you can run a series of tests fairly easily and guarantee that you have a certain caliber of quality all the way through to increase your confidence, basically, in delivering software. And here's where we start to see the conflict arise, right? The real conflict between dev and ops. Because you inherently have these competing incentives and priorities, right? You have ops wants everything to stay the same forever, and that would be great. If nothing ever changed, they'd be super happy, and everything would be fantastic. And dev wants everything to change all the time, right? If nothing stayed the same, then they could get so much done, and they could just be constantly shipping software, right? So these things run into each other fairly quickly. And we have this thing arise called the wall, right? And the wall becomes this subject of conversation for everybody, because suddenly you have, and we had this gesture from yesterday where dev is just accelerating at an incredible pace, right? You can just build software like crazy now because you can base it on some open source thing, change a couple things, and then say, yeah, let's ship that out, right? And it runs into ops, because ops is like, what? Nobody talked to us about this, right? Like, where did this come from? What am I supposed to do with it? It doesn't even have a README in the repo. So here's where we start to see technical debt, right? Because there's very little visibility back into development about what it takes to run and operate software and keep it stable and sustainable at scale, right? Maybe scale wasn't even considered because you're running a single instance of a server on your dev laptop, right? And so all of this sort of gives rise to DevOps, because all of a sudden we need to address this problem, or else we're just going to deal with the wall forever, right? So we start to see some results from all this infrastructure as code, people doing it well, people doing collaboration well, doing the bridge between dev and ops well. When things like Heartbleed come up, they're like, oh yeah, Heartbleed came up and we patched it and all of our systems were updated in about 5 minutes. And everybody else was like, this is going to be a month. Like, I'm not going home for a month because I have to go and log into all my servers and check them and then go and upgrade software and make sure that nothing broke and run all this manual regression testing, because, we had incurred this technical debt over all these years where we knew that we should be automating all this stuff, but we just couldn't afford it, or we couldn't arrive at a consensus that it was important enough to spend time on before something catastrophic happened. And we're starting to see more insourcing, right? We're starting to see these companies that were outsourcing forever start bringing things back in-house because they realize that business value really actually matters, to the point where you want people close to your individual company mission working on the core pieces of your business. The stuff that drives value, the stuff that makes you money, should probably be handled by people who are 100% aligned with your goals and not trying to make money off of you. And that makes a lot of sense, right? So we're seeing people abandon outsourcing at this point, and there's been this giant shift. And as you do that, you start thinking a lot about your software delivery process and your testing process and how you build code, because maybe you've never done it before, and this is a giant piece of technical debt that you now have to address and build out all this tooling. So I think that a large portion of this focus on DevOps is because of this issue, that people need to start building their own things, and nobody's been good at it if you haven't been doing it for ages. And it's going to take a lot of effort. But luckily we have things like DevOps Days where people can share stories of that, where I'm coming from an outsourcing situation and we're starting to build things in-house, and how do you do it? How was it done? There's not a lot of shared stories out there. People don't really write articles about this stuff because they're usually buried in work, right? They're embarrassed about their situation. They don't want to talk publicly about it until it's like fixed and they can say, here's how we did it. So open spaces is an opportunity for doing things like that, and coming to conferences like DevOps Days and DevOps Enterprise. So now we're at the point where we all accept that empathy makes everything better, and everything's fantastic when we share, right? And we talk about this for good reason. We have blameless postmortems and retrospectives, and we talk about resiliency at scale, and things are getting a little bit more advanced, right? But where do we go from this point, right? So beyond DevOps, like, what are we working on next? And it's been sort of said by previous presentations, I think we're all sort of on the same page with this. Automation is the next piece that we need to tackle and focus on. And it takes a lot of attention and care to make sure that you're not just building like errors as a service, right? You want to make sure that your automation actually does something valuable over and over again in a repeatable and consistent way. ChatOps is another big part of that, right? I don't think anyone's ever used this stupid word before, because when I typed it into Google, nothing came up, and it said, "Do you mean collabo tomato?" Which is awesome. I was very happy about that. And when we start talking about things like Conway's Law, which is basically people designing systems that mirror their communication structures in their organizations, right? And ChatOps is a big part of that. Chat itself is a big part of sort of shaping the communication of a company, and thus shaping what you do, which is largely building software these days. I'm going to skip right past this slide because really I don't have time to talk about containers. So I want to leave you guys with a little bit of advice, which is very opinionated, but that's okay. You can discount my opinions. I would say hiring for DevOps right now is very challenging, and I would advise against it entirely. It's very much driven by number two, the whole fashion side of the meaning of trend, and it's very expensive. And they might have a technical skill or two, but it's really difficult to say what they do exactly and what they're really good at. And it's hard to sort of match that up with what you need, right? So try and be specific. And that's my next point. Be specific about what you need when you talk about DevOps, Be specific about what you're looking for and what the specific problem that you're trying to address is, because, just like everybody's been saying, when you're trying to communicate with people, you have to make sure that you're clear, or else you're going to be dealing with a lot of assumptions and people coming to their own conclusions about what you say and what you mean. And that's really complicated. Another thing is, like, when you're sort of working towards your goal, right? Don't really call it DevOps if you can avoid it, right? Talk about what you're specifically trying to achieve, right? We want to make sure that software breaks less in production, or we want to actually run our continuous integration scheme in half the time, right? Or it has to be under 20 minutes. Or we want to be able to onboard our developers in no more than 20 minutes, right? And spin up a dev laptop. Or we want to be able to release a new version of software in less than an hour. Or even, we want to ship software in less than 4 weeks. It doesn't have to be something super optimistic, like just better than what you have right now, but be specific about what better looks like. And that's going to increase your odds of success immeasurably. As you do all this, don't forget about security. Don't just think about it afterwards, or assume that it sort of comes around automatically when you automate things, because it absolutely doesn't. There's another great slide that gets used way too much, but I love, and everybody who watches my talks probably knows what it is, but so I went with brick. But yeah, plan your access, right? Plan what happens when someone leaves the company. Plan for game days. PagerDuty does this great, like, Failure Fridays thing where they'll bring down part of the system just to see what happens. Think about that stuff. You might not be able to do it right now, but think about it, and think about it when you're building something new, because you want to aim for being able to do that. One of the last things I want to leave you with is that tech is probably not your problem. I use this image because Monopoly it's a fine game. It's an okay game. It's a people problem with Monopoly, right? Like, nobody likes playing Monopoly because of people. It's not because the game is somehow inherently flawed to a degree that it doesn't work. But eventually somebody flips the table, and it's because, people have different priorities. People will act selfishly. And that's usually the problem that you have to deal with before you think about, is our stack good enough? Or, should we be using a different key value store, right? All that stuff is kind of a minor problem when you think of the larger cultural implications of running a company and a team. And be sure to have a mission, right? be sure to sort of aim for something specific and plan an approach. And don't just say, you know, we're going to be more DevOpsy, or we're going to be more of one thing or another. Aim for something specific, and you'll find that you have a much easier time getting consensus, agreement, selling it to other people. You'll be able to have better conversations about it, and you'll ultimately end up with a better result when you be specific. And that's it for me. Thanks, everybody.